G'day everyone, I'm Patrick. Welcome to the workshop. Today I'm going to be talking about biscuits, dominoes, or nothing at all. Tell you when to use them, when not to use them, when it's not necessary. If it looks like I'm sweating in here, it's because it's about 35 degrees or I don't know, 100 something if you're in Fahrenheit. It is hot, it's been hot for a couple days, the workshop is heated up and it is not cooled down. But I have to glue up some big panels, well, one big panel, it's the giant desk. And I thought it was a perfect opportunity to talk about biscuits. Biscuits look like this. Dominoes look like this. They come in different sizes, so do these. They are both methods of joining timber in one way or another. Today we're really talking about joining panels like this, as opposed to talking about perpendicular joinery. They use two different machines. This is a domino cutter, quite expensive, by Festool. This is a biscuit cutter, much less expensive, lots of companies make them. The domino cutter uses a tiny little thing that looks like a router bit to cut a slot. It's spinning and oscillating back and forth, which allows it to cut that slot. That's a cross section of the slot, and the domino sits in that slot. The biscuit cutter is a slot cutter. It's a circular blade, like a slot cutter on a router. In fact, you can cut biscuits using a router if you don't have a biscuit machine. The biscuit slot in the wood looks like that, and that's a sectional, like a, what would you call that? When you place your biscuit slot in timber, it looks like this, and this is a cross section where I've cut through. The biscuit sits in that slot. Both pieces of timber that need to be joined need to have a corresponding hole, either for biscuits or dominoes. They need to line up. If they don't line up, you won't get your timber to line up. People often ask me when I'm teaching or talking about wood to people, which is often, when do you know when to use a domino or a biscuit or when not to? And I think there are two main reasons, two categories of reasons, and we'll talk about what sits underneath those. The first category is the glue joint is bad for some reason, and I'll talk about those reasons. The second category is the alignment is bad for some reason, and I'll talk about those reasons. Okay, the glue joint is bad. What does that mean? There are certain timbers which just don't take PVA very well. Namely, some of our Australian species, blackbutt, spotted gum, some ironbark, really oily species, just kind of don't love gluing with PVA. Now, there are things you can do to fix that. A freshly cut surface, rub a tiny bit of acetone along that glue edge before you glue up, which is what I'll be doing here because this is blackbutt. In those instances where you are worried that the glue is actually not going to be doing enough of a job to hold those boards together, you are adding a domino or a biscuit for strength. And if it were me and you have access to it, a domino is going to give you more strength than a biscuit. However, a biscuit will still give you strength. So, the other reason a glue joint might be bad, well, two more for you. If you need to join boards on end grain, the glue joint is almost useless. So if you could put a couple of dominoes in there or some biscuits, it will dramatically increase the strength of the joint. A second reason the glue joint could be bad, gluing on plywood. If you need to join two plywood panels together, the nature of plywood means you've got half end grain, half long grain. There is a chance that those end grain sections, the long grain layers, just won't line up. So you're essentially creating an end grain joint. Then you will need biscuits or dominoes, in my opinion, to strengthen that joint. It'll also help with alignment, which is important. One last reason the glue joint might be bad. You might have boards that are not dead straight, and in a perfect world, you're going to run them over the jointer. Now, sometimes, on some timbers, you're just going to get heaps of tear out. Tear out makes a terrible glue joint. You also might have the situation where the board is just too long, or you just can't joint it properly. Maybe you don't have a jointer. And so you know that there are going to be some gaps or alignment issues. Maybe you can fill those gaps later, but it's not going to be a strong glue joint. Dominoes and biscuits can help you kind of get over that line by at least adding some strength in places where you don't have a perfect timber on timber glue joint. The second reason, the second category of reasons that you might need to use a domino or biscuit is that the alignment of your boards is bad. This could be because the boards are warped. I've laid these boards out flat This one sits high. Now I can bend them into position, but Biscuits might aid with that. I will often use clamping cauls instead of Biscuits or Dominoes to bring them into position, and that will go some of the way, but often it won't get it as close as using a Domino or a Biscuit to join these panels. Very often, if I'm doing glue up by myself, I will use Dominoes and Biscuits, even though it takes me longer in the setup time, because it's going to assist me during the glue up, which is more stressful, to get those boards aligned and get the clamps on faster, especially if I'm using PVA. So, this board here has some twist. You can see it's sitting high. The other one at the other end has some twist. These are really long panels. They're about 3.6 meters. There's only 4 boards here, so there's not too much glue line, but if this was much wider, that's a lot of glue line for me to keep wet while I join this thing together. And having some Biscuits to kind of hold it in place, or some Dominoes, can really assist with that. This alignment thing is super important if your only method of flattening the panel is sanding, because sanding even half a mil from one board to the next will take you a really long time, and it'll just burn through sandpaper, and especially in a hard timber like black butt or black wood, which just burns up in sanding sometimes. You just don't want to be trying to sand out that kind of inconsistency. Now, what about a giant thicknesser, you say? Very valid point. A thicknesser will get rid of a half mil discrepancy, a millimeter discrepancy, like it's nothing at all. Here's a couple of reasons why I sometimes can't put a panel like this through the thicknesser. First reason, it's already too thin. This is 20 mil stock. I don't want it much thinner than that. If I'm gluing up some 40 mil stock and I know it needs to go down to 30, I'm not going to use any Dominoes or Biscuits because it just doesn't need it. I'm happy to thickness out any discrepancy, any wonkiness in the thicknesser later on. Second reason I can't use a thicknesser sometimes. Panels are just too wide. I have a 630 wide thicknesser. That gets about half of the stuff I do. Often desks are wider than that. Tables are always wider than that. I can do tables in 2 sections, which I do. Lots of folks don't have a thicknesser that wide. You might only have a little one. So you're thicknessing pieces, but they're not thicknessing the entire panel. So you're stuck with sanding, which is why you want to get that alignment right at the start. And yeah, it takes time. You're gonna have to mark all the boards out and do the Biscuit holes or the Domino holes. That adds 40 minutes, but it's probably gonna save you 2 hours of sanding, which everyone hates sanding. Okay, so after all of that waffling, what am I gonna use on these panels? Okay, so it's black butt, which is waxy, and PVA doesn't love. So it's already not a great, super strong glue joint, potentially. These are thin panels, thin boards, which means I can't really thickness them. It's also gonna be wider than my thicknesser, so I also can't really thickness them. So, potentially bad glue joint, and I'm going to be stuck with sanding any discrepancy. So I am going to use Biscuits or Dominoes. Now, which one do I want to use? I could use either. I have a Domino, so I'm going to use that. I think it's going to add a little bit more strength than Biscuits will, but Biscuits will still help you out. If you do not have a Biscuit jointer, you can use a slot cutter. So you can run a slot cutter like this. You can get these 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch collet, chuck, shank, whatever that is, to run in a trimmer router or a regular handheld router, or you could do it on a router table. But you just need to make sure the slot cutter is the same width as a Biscuit, which I'm going to measure right now. I should know this, it kind of depends on the Biscuit. 3.89, so you want like a 4 mil slot cutter. Yeah, this is a 4 mil slot cutter, that's what I'd use. Biscuits expand slightly in the gap. They're kind of a slightly smooshed piece of wood, and with a water-based glue, they puff up and they will really grab. Don't put the Biscuit slot too close to the top for that reason. If this is only a mil or 2 below the surface, as they expand, you might see, especially in soft panel boards like MDF, you might see that little bit of expansion as like a raise in the surface. Okay, so I'm gonna use my Domino. I'm gonna mark out the positions of the Dominoes first on this board, and I'm gonna take care that they're not too close to the end. Now, this particular application is gonna be installed, it's a giant desk. It's gonna be installed between 2 walls, so the end grain will never be seen. If there happens to be a Domino somewhere in the end grain, it just doesn't matter. But that's usually not the case. Usually you can see the end grain in a desk or a table. And there have been times in my work and plenty of other things that I've seen where people have installed dominoes or biscuits and then they've cut straight through them, and you can see that on the end grain of the table, and it looks terrible and it's difficult to fix. So make sure you know where they are and it's not going to fall on a cut line. Trust me. Yeah, that's approximately 400 mil between each one. That'd be more than enough. There's no real science to it. They're hidden within the timber, so they don't have to be a perfect distance between each of them. So we're going to go through and label these boards first of all, so that I know which order they go in when I join them together. A, B, C, D. And now we just need to go through and mark those slots. You could use a big square and mark all of them at the same time. That's probably more efficient. Okay, so I'm just going to cut some domino slots. A lot of moving timber around. Place the domino slot in the center of the board. It doesn't have to be exactly, but as close to the center as you can get. Make sure that that remains consistent across all of the boards, otherwise it's defeating the purpose. It won't be flat. Use extraction, and yeah, just gotta do it. It takes time. So I just dropped a piece of wood. It's okay though, I only dinted the not joining side. I'll be able to fix that. Okay, I'm going to join these boards. First thing, as I mentioned, black butt, oily. Spotted gum, similar, oily. Lots of other timbers, also oily. We are going to use acetone to wipe the glue surfaces, pre-glue. Let the acetone fully dry off. This will make sure that there's no oily residue on this timber when we go to glue it, which will improve the quality of the glue joints. I'm just using a PVA glue. You can see some residue rubbing off. It's probably more sawdust than wax, but you know, a bit of both. You need to do this to both sides of the timber. Okay, that's basically dried straight away. Like I mentioned, it's very hot. We're going to start by putting dominoes into some holes. I like to do this neatly in a way that doesn't get glue all over that surface. The reason for this is if for some reason it's taking me too long, which it often does, if I haven't put glue all over the surface, I've just put it in that specific domino hole, it's not going to matter if that domino dries. If you go ahead and glue the entire surface and then bang dominoes in, things can happen and all of a sudden you don't have time to fix it. So, when you are doing dominoes, when doing joinery like this, dominoes have the ability to do a narrow hole, the exact width of the domino itself, and a slightly wider hole. That means that one of the domino holes allows some lateral movement, which helps with alignment. It doesn't allow for any up and down movement, so our panel still stays flat, but it means that you don't have to be quite as accurate. That's a narrow hole, exactly the width of a domino, in this case a 5mm domino. That is a wider hole, so that is the one that can slip back and forth. I'm going to insert these dominoes right now in the narrow hole. I'm going to put a tiny bit of glue in every single narrow hole, tap the domino in, and I am then going to move on to applying glue to the opposite surface that face will glue onto. Now that those dominoes are in place, I've flipped the boards over so that I've got the side I'm actually going to apply glue to, and I'm clamping them together so that I can use a little roller. Okay, I'm going to spread Titebond 3 all over these 3 pieces and then roll it out flat. I don't have to worry about too much glue getting into these holes because these holes are wider than the other holes, so any glue will just be able to squeeze out. This big gap here is part of the reason I'm using dominoes. And now we clamp. going to start, before I apply too much pressure crossways, by putting some clamping cauls on to make sure the panel is flat, as opposed to making sure that each board is perfectly aligned. Now I'm going to go through and put the big F clamps on, some from above and some from below. As this video goes on, I'm getting progressively sweatier. The sun is hitting my roller door directly and it's like 50 degrees over there. I don't skimp on clamps. I use lots of them. I use a fair bit of pressure. I just think that, especially with long pieces, there's always some sort of discrepancy, even using a big jointer. So you've just got to press that out. Cauls on the front, cauls on the back. I'm going to put another set of cauls in the center just to make sure that it is staying flat, because as you add lots of clamps, you are adding tension in various directions. Obviously there's lots of glue all over the top of this, which I'll just have to sand off later. I'm hesitant to like wipe all of this off with water now, because it's just going to add so much moisture difference between the top and the bottom that it could just bow the board. So I just don't think it's worth it. All right, everybody, that is your rundown on biscuits and dominoes and when to use and not use them. I got to get out of here before I expire from heat stroke. I hope you got something out of it. There'll be some links down below to bits and pieces that I've used. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me keep my job. And I love doing this. So hit that button. You'll see all of our videos coming out every week. And I'll see you next week with something new.